Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Edward Gui. I'm the director of NanHai Art, and welcome to the second session of NanHai Art Seminar Series, which is part of our ongoing efforts to preserving Chinese heritage and sharing the unique cultural values and aesthetics of Chinese art with the American public. Today is my great honor and pleasure to introduce to you the speaker today, Professor Zaixin from the University of Puget. Dr. Hong is a professor of art history, and his research focuses on Song Yuan and modern Chinese painting, modern Sino-Japanese relationship, and the global market for Chinese art. In addition, once more, I want to mention one book. That's Dr. Hong's award-winning textbook. That's called the History of Art, Chinese Art. In Chinese, 中国美术史. That's the most widely used textbook by Chinese college students who major in art history or in related fields. So since it was first published in the year of 2000, it already has 20 printings with more than 100,000 copies sold. Just imagine that, several years from now, art professionals work in the field of Chinese art, whether as museum curators or gallerists or college lecturers, were all introduced to this field by Dr. Hong's book. How great is that? Yeah. So to me, Professor Hong is a great storyteller. When he tells the hidden yet fascinating stories in the history of the art, you will easily notice the indescribable joy in his eyes, and you'll also be attracted and immersed into his world of art. And on the other hand, I respect Professor Hong as a rigorous scholar. You will be amazed later to see how thoroughly he collects all his research data through innumerable archives from every corner of the world. In fact, just now, this morning, he paid a short visit to Berkeley Art Museum. Just in order to see one picture, he's going to mention one painting. He's going to mention in today's lecture. We have a very tight schedule because the museum opens at 11 o'clock, and the BART round trip takes more than 2 hours. But Professor Hong insists to go. That's how serious a great scholar takes on his research. So without further ado, let's welcome Professor Hong.
I have to take off this one because my number is different. So in order to keep my talk with my schedule notes.
I prepared this slide for about 10 minutes. I can wait a second. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Dear Director Grace, ladies, gentlemen, friends. It is my great pleasure to visit the NanHai Art Center and present a talk on a challenging, this is not an easy one. When I received the invitation, my first response to this kind of a challenging issue was the location. The location. From the business point of view, location is vital, which connects me to three elements of human endeavors, namely events, people, and ideas, in the place that I try to cover. Speaking of people, I'm so happy that some older friends show up, and also my wife is with me, so I'm very pleased, and my daughter perhaps will join us. And tomorrow I will go to see my mentor, James Cahill. I went there, but I didn't have time. So my talk will cover the conceptual process. This is about the transformation of Chinese painting through a very special act of kind of endeavor called overseas collecting. We can say, okay, collections are in everywhere, but my focus recently, or in the recent decade, on this very special topic. Let me begin with a very shocking title. The title of a book by Oxford historian in 2010. This is a very kind of inspiring topic for me to begin with the issue of transformation. We can imagine, would it be possible to have a book on the same title published a century ago? You can just jump your imagination. And then we can have another related question. What made this transformation possible, and how? And I can quote a very famous British aesthetician, John Ruskin. He says, great nations write their autobiographies in 3 manuscripts: the book of deed, the book of word, and the book of art. None of them can be fully understood unless you read the other 2. But among the 3, the only trustworthy is the last. So, my talk is a case study based on the book of art. So I'm not a historian to talk about the big issue, but I will try to give you a hint about how overseas collectors have transformed Chinese painting. So you will see it's a very big conceptual process, but it is really an important one. So let's go back to 1911. So it's about 100 years ago. What was happening in the global market for Chinese art? I give you one quote, a famous quote, because the person who wrote this was a very significant cultural figure, Deng Shi from Canton. He was the person who compiled and published a series of books on fine arts, 美术丛书, in that year. So you can see a very interesting observation about how global market was changing. What kind of interest you can see in the last 2 or 3 years, Westerners began to be interested in purchasing Chinese paintings. And then you can see that kind of effort result a very kind of amazing phenomenon in the major capitals in the West. The museums, the private collectors, they showed their passion for this very new collectible items. So I don't need to cover all, but I just give you an idea 100 years ago, what was happening. Very important. And then we see another case, also in 1911, but after the revolution. Deng Shi's publication before the revolution. After the revolution, in November, what happened? A lawyerist who self-exiled to Kyoto for 9 years. And I just published a book in this anthology. The title is A Newly Made Marketable Leftover. Marketable leftover. He was not just a pure scholar. He was a dealer. It was very kind of interesting figure. And then his cultural capital related to three aspects of a rare art tradition. We have different rare traditions, means art collection. And in 1982, a very famous kind of a contribution made by a journalist of New York Times, Joseph Alsop, and he had a kind of a related topic we can see the subtitle is most interesting, The History of Art Collecting and its linked phenomenon wherever this have appeared. So you can see this is kind of overwhelming phenomenon. And you can see I cannot cover all of them. It's impossible, right? So my focus will based on what Luo Zhengyu's practice demonstrate. He made his very successful business in his exile years and doing three things, or showing three aspects of art collecting. First is business. The second is to satisfy the pastime, the hobby. And then the third one, most important, is to preserve Chinese traditional culture. So you can see that I will focus on the third. And the reason, I give you very practical reason. I'm not doing the business, I'm not in the business world, though it is a very important part for all the efforts that I will cover. And then we can give you a very successful story, a businessman. And his name is Charles Lam Friel, and he donated his collection to the state, to the nation. So you have Friel Gallery, belongs to the Smithsonian Institution. You go to DC, and you can enjoy it. And then this masterpiece was made, or the deal was made here in San Francisco in April 29th, 1915, in the Fairmont Hotel. So we have price, so I will show you the detail later. But you can see that's the bill, the detail, the business, and you can see the price. This famous song album of 5 aged men, the price, the dealer asked for 5,000 yuan, but finally the sold to a collector called Jiang Ruzang. I will ask you later the situation of his son, because I'm doing investigation of his sons, in the price of 3,000. So the up to now in Friel's collection. So you can see the business, the price, the picture here. His partner Mayer paid $10,000, but not one, two. So perhaps 5,000 each. So you can have an idea of the price, right? So I skipped the kind of detail of the business, but I cannot skip a very important map, a picture about the market. December 27th, 1918, the Eastern Time published an article reporting what happened in the domestic and international market. And very especially in introducing the international market or foreign market, there are 5 different parts. And I will try to cover the 5 different parts accordingly. And you will see the 5th one, the syncopal, seems to be far away, but it will be most important, you will see. And then something missing, I will add. So that's the fascinating part of the detective process. Another case about the price, that's a tricky part. That's the one I made the trip just hours ago. And I highly recommend you to go there if you haven't been there. So that's the exhibition. And you can read the yesterday's Wall Street reporting. So you can see the latest kind of publicity. And my research will show how fascinating that this work related to the opening up of our understanding of many things. First is about the price. You can see the price in 2008, 2009 in New York. It was estimated for the price less than the actual deal. So you can see it is in a good price. And it's just an amazing piece, but I will leave the detail just in a minute. I give you a hint. Who were the first who made this transaction possible? And that was the major discovery I made. So I can declare I'm perhaps the first person who made this discovery clear. Or made it, it's the real historical revelation. So I will give you more detail. Just one thing that you may find that's very special. Special about the first transaction in July 1913. And the catalog of that painting was published 1 year after, with the help of the Chinese partners, British partners, and others. And one of the major players in this transaction is a famous Chinese painter. His name is Huang Binhong. In 1941, Huang Binhong received an interview in Beijing to the New Beijing Daily and told this story. I quote, "When I was in Shanghai, a Serbian fellow," and I will give you the complexity of the story, "who served in the Shanghai Maritime Custom Office as a clerk, was extremely interested in purchasing Huang, or ancient Chinese painting, in the market. The price he paid for each painting did not exceed 5 yuan. Remember this, okay, 5 yuan. He paid 1 yuan or 2 or 2.5 or 4 to purchase a painting. Within a year, this foreigner acquired hundreds of paintings with less than 1,000 yuan. He had all these paintings photographed, whether or not they were forged or genuine, commissioned the commercial press to publish them as a large English book." Okay, 5 yuan. Okay, what's the mystery there, right? But I learned that story far later than my first encounter the mystery. So, we give you the participants. Now I give you another example. One painting from that catalog was priced for what is that? Half million dollars. That's easy. Oh, my daughter is coming. Thank you for coming. The director of Asian Art San Francisco Asian Art Museum, Dr. Zaixin, he told me, "Hey, do you know that was back to 2007. Do you know that the owner, he was a Stanford graduate, Michael Sullivan's student, in charge of this gallery, advertised for this painting from Stronik's former collection. And Jay went there, saw the painting. But he was then the Asian Art Department head. He didn't make that purchase. But anyway, that was the extra information about how pricey now the collection. And then we see in today's show, I just went there, another painting from Stronik's former collection. Professor Cahill was so excited. He emailed me and said, do you know, another one came from Stronik with a price tag, a small price tag attached to this painting, about $700. So that's a later, I don't know when, but you can get a sense of the market issue. So I think that's enough for me because I do not know much about the business. And I'm also not a collector, so I will be brief on the pastime. And you know, the limit of pastime is the sky. You can cover everything. And someone enjoyed their hobby as the profession. I have a student supposed to be here. She was paid for her hobby of doodling as a director of the Department of Doodling for the online company in the Bay Area. So you can see hobby could be very worthwhile. And hobby can also go to extremities, such as a 17th century collector, Zhang Taijie. I wrote a paper in 2004 for the Paris Museum in Taipei. Fascinating case. A person who was almost blind, but he was so, we call it, die-hard to collecting the ancient paintings at the price of, selling his land, his, family property. So he was crazy. His friend from Songjiang, Chen Jilu, another great scholar, wrote a preface to his book, or his anthology of poems, said that people, we call it, showed that kind of passion for collecting can be pathologically obsessive. And he was that guy. And he must learn from what he paid. So he was a genius. He fabricated 200 ancient paintings based on his imagination and published a 20-volume book called Bao Hui Lu. Still very popular. And in Taipei Palace Museum, I saw a forgery. So the one that you can see, we call the hobby, can be very special, sometimes crazy. So I cannot talk too much, but I can give you a very interesting thing which is related to our so-called hobby. My wife and I recently discovered that whenever we visit a place, we just do window shopping of antique shops. So just recent trip to Long Island in Washington State, we stopped by a very tiny town called Iwaka. Very tiny, 600 population, 600 people population. However, inside of this gallery, there was a painting. And there is a price tag. So I didn't know this. So I took up pictures, and then I did my homework in the hotel because my Zoom can look at the detail. And I found something very interesting. Like 91, and the person called Liu Yezhao is famous here. And most important, he was my, he is a alma mater. He is an alumni of my alma mater. And then, story can go on and on. But my point here is not about this. It's about the quotation he made. At the age of 91, in 2001, which is a contemporary work, because in the invitation, Director Gui asked if you can cover the contemporary part, that would be great. And I said, well, that's a contemporary. And then you can see why an established artist in his 91 age, still quoted Confucius' teaching. I said, it's perfect for my talk. You know what? I'm not a collector, but I can learn from you. And I always learn from my investigation, and everywhere I go, I met people so knowledgeable and so specialized in certain areas. In Chinese expression, we call it the place where the hidden 藏龙卧虎, the hidden dragon and crouching tigers. So I will ask you later about some questions. So here is my kind of story that I want to unfold about the pastime. I want to learn from you that you are specialty. I have one person, actually two persons, who was the buyer of the 5 elder celebrities of the 11th century, who paid 3,000 yuan. And he had 2 sons. One is Jiang Zhuyi, and his 字 is Gu Shun, and he was born in 1902 and died in 1973. When I deliver a lecture in the Palace Museum in Beijing, I mentioned his name, and one audience said, "Oh, I know this person. My friend's husband or some relative, they know this person, and who moved, to Taiwan from mainland and then to the Bay Area. So if you know this person, can you let me know?" The second one is his brother. I don't know if it's elder or younger brother, and his name I only know the initial, called P.S. Jiang, and he lived in Seattle, and I didn't know. I haven't encountered any kind of a possible person who can provide. In 1960, he sold quite a few paintings to the Art Museum of the University of Michigan. And I'm doing a research on those paintings. So if you, by any, opportunity, you can provide me the crew, I will appreciate it. So that's the one about the second part of the collection. The most important one that I will cover is about the preservation, the one that we preserve the culture. And this is the one that I learned so much from Professor Cahill. And you can see in 1992, I was a research fellow at Berkeley with Professor Cahill. In the museum, we have a special room and his collection there. So you can see that he exemplifies how collecting directly enhances our understanding of the historical fact. And here is another great thing about the Berkeley. And it was in that very special place I began to solve the Stronic mystery. I started my teaching career at the China Academy of Fine Arts in Hangzhou in 1984. The next year, my mentor published a chronological chart of Huang Binhong. And then in the item or in the entry of the 1914, he mentioned that Huang wrote a preface to Symbolically 中华名画论. And I didn't see that book until I was in the East Asian Library, older one. And I was so thrilled because my professor said, no such a thing. But I said, you wrote on the entry on the chart. I said, no, forget it. Then I asked another one who cooperated with my mentor on the same chart. And he refused to answer my question as well. So what's the problem? And just to my great surprise, in the East Asian Library, I found a copy with his signature, with the address. And later I know that is the address that Huang Binhong and his partners, foreign and domestic, made the forgeries there. That was a very special place until 1929. Later on, he moved to another place called the Jiangxi Road, because that year Stronach made a second deal, or second sale in Tokyo. So he moved his business. And in the same catalog, that lavish book, now you can see, with Huang Binhong's debut in the international market as a Chinese connoisseur. So Huang Puchun is his, sobriquet name. So that is the surprising thing I was, encountering. Then I began to wonder when I, lived through the pages. So many junks, so many forgeries, terrible forgeries. And I said, how could this be? And then the way that you will see, we also encountered some genres were excluded in the Chinese connoisseurs or collectors kind of vocabulary, like the beauty, like the posthumous portrait, like the Zi-style landscape, etc. So that was a very amazing kind of things, and I didn't tell my professor. Until 2001, I present my case study, reveal this cooperation. My professor was there. After my presentation, we had a dinner. He sat by me, hold my hand, stop here. We knew this long time ago. We knew. I said, why didn't you tell me? It's shameful. But it is not just about the face of his mentor. It is actually related to many things. Many things. It's not only about forging something. It's about the excluded types or genres in Chinese art. It's low taste. That's the major point. He wasn't. Never mind. That's for foreign market, to fool foreigners. Well, the story goes on, and then we can see my discovery about this book was actually a turning point. You will see a sea change followed. It's really a remarkable thing. Think about the deal was made in July 1913. And the catalog was completely irrelevant, I should say, irrelevant to that deal afterward. So what's the point? Why there was international cooperation for making that catalog? You can see very shocking and amazing statement. The advertisement, both Chinese and English, and the catalog itself priced $20. $20. A middle-class member, yearly monthly earn is $40. So it's really good price. But you can see the real point I'm making is about the new inventions of the 20th century. And if you are familiar with the publication of the catalogs, this is really the first of many things. And above all is the concept. You can see those who have the concept of world art will know the price of Chinese art. So that's a really important thing. And Stronach developed the the strategy. The strategy I highlight in this way. He was the first to join Shanghai's leading figures in initiating the bilingual annotated publication. Joining him was Wu Changshi and Huang Binhong. They all handwritten preface to that catalog. And then one incorporating colotype reproductions. That was a very new technology. With promotions in both Chinese and English language. Actually, three, you can see, published in English and Chinese and German and Chinese. But German version never came out. But advertisement already there. And then you can see using a national and international distribution network. You can see Kelly and Wash company is international. If you know the early publication, like you did for the Bay Area, the Kelly and Wash was the one, that's Chinese name. That was a major kind of distributor, very important. And above all, in inventing a comprehensive packaging strategy. Then you will see a kind of a major change. The change, we can see first, the transformation of a global market for Chinese art. From objects, before that, all about ceramics, furniture or whatever. Objects, because materialized. You can trust. Painting is always tricky, always related to forgery. But now, antique painting. And you can see, just the same year, the famous journalist, he was a very famous person, published in 字林西报, Chinese name. So you can see, I read this. In 1900, only 14 years ago, the ignorance of the world respecting the existence of Chinese art was immense. There was an appreciation of porcelain. A few people had heard of jade. Chinese painting was almost unknown compared to understanding of it, which now exists. Who was the promoter? Who was the contributor? So that's a very important part. We see the first transformation. Chinese painting became a marketable object in the world. Very important. Now you see the sea change after 1914. 1914 in Japan, Luo Zhenyu was in Japan. He was really a figure. So if you are interested in reading my article, you will find how tricky that person was. And then the bilingual one, and later on trilingual one. Guess what kind of trilingual? Latin. Latin, because the targeted audience was Catholic believers. Chinese painting in Latin. And then you see 1915 is a very important year. Because what? San Francisco. What happened here? You all know, right? This expo, that was the opportunity. That was the time that Chinese dealers were all targeting their American buyers. And then you can see what was a new marketplace that in this very important called a foreign market. Stronach, Faharas, and Huang Binhong opened up. You look at this map, you see, well, 5 major targets. What was missing? The missing part was actually Sweden, Scandinavia. Scandinavia, because the Crown Prince was the major patron for Chinese art. Major patron. But this picture didn't show that, right? So if I make a connection, this one goes to not Anglo-French market, but the Scandinavian market. So that was a major contribution, very important. And then the fabricated things, very interesting in Chinese media. If you read the English copy, title page, you will see this collection was recently, has recently been acquired by Klaas Faharas of Stockholm. Clearly. But in Chinese version, this notion or this notice is ignored. Then the Chinese newspaper promoted that, said, oh, this collection was purchased by the Sweden royal family and installed in a very special room. They call it a very special room. But this room belonged to Faharas. Nothing to do with the crown prince. And crown prince didn't visit China until 1926. 13 years after. So nothing to do with that. But why the Chinese media related that transaction to the royal family? Because Chinese people had that market, the sense of marketability, trademark. Number one trademark is the imperial connection. If you have an imperial seal, done. So that's why they put this imperial trademark on the first collection, which has nothing to do with actual crown prince. So you see the tricky part? And who was the storyteller? So now we have just recently, last May, I received a researcher's email, sending me the link and sending me the picture. We now know for that trip, Faharas took quite a few photos. And we know him. And his granddaughter working for the Goethe Museum. And Sweden had a long history with China. In 1796, the richest businessman in the world, Pan Zhenchen, from Canton, he visited Goethe. And his portrait in glass still in the collection of that museum. So it was not surprising to me to see that, the Scandinavia people have that kind of interest. So now we see the travel of the 8 beauties. I can say that my discovery of the Strunick kind of story, Dr. Hill provided me a lot of information. And I presented a talk and published an article in Tokyo National Institution for Cultural Properties in 2004, and retrieve all the history, all the story of this travel. Because in 1926, according to the initial kind of contract, Faharas couldn't sell the painting piece by piece. It must be a wholesale. But in 1926, according to his granddaughter's kind of introduction, that he was in financial trouble. So he resold the collection. So you can see here, the one in Stockholm was the one that contains this picture for the second time. First time in 1914, second time in 1920 and 26. And in the entire world, maybe that catalog, only one in Princeton University. So very, very rare. And a great story. About this 8 beauties, Scandinavia critic had a completely different view from Chinese point of view. From Chinese point of view, it's junk. But you can see the catalog entry had a very amazing kind of praising words. So one or two of the gems, first and foremost, that of the Eight Beauties. Certainly one of the most exquisite reproduction of Chinese painting that have been preserved to our time. A worthy Oriental counterpart to the great portraits of the great Dutch masters, Rembrandt especially. Can you imagine? You can see that painting. And when you see that painting, would you make that connection to the greatest, genius of all time, across the border of the country? And he perhaps mentioned the image that related to Rembrandt's mistress. I saw that painting in Berlin, and I said, oh, that's what Colin, the Sweden critic, made the reference. So now we see the second transformation, the transformation of the concept of what were good paintings and what were bad paintings in China. If without this overseas collecting, Chinese conventional or biased view would exclude that forever. Just junk, just a low taste. How can you, portray the view of the prostitutes, right, for advertisement? And then you see Berkeley. My mentor had a very insightful observation on what happened in the global market, and the genre, and the style. So I will not go to detail. You can just see his paper in 201 in Orientations. Very thoughtful observations. And he mentioned about person Pang Yuanjing. This is the person who struck the deal in San Francisco with Freer for a very important business we mentioned later. So this is the show. This is a show. This is a show. And you can see the major American media reported, right? Why? Because of Stronick, because of that kind of effort. And then Cahill published the book. And I wrote a review for the Oxford Art Journal. I have some extra copies. If you like, you can take a copy for interest. And in his book, he introduced some very, very good, high quality paintings, like illustration of Jinping by Gu Jianlong, now in the National Arts Museum in Kansas City. Just exquisite, very high quality. And this one is the cover page. Cover page. You go to the art museum, you will believe why this painting was chosen. Why Wall Street Journal choose that painting. Whatever, just see the way that how this painting became the major one. And now we have another. We just see the new place, right? But in America, what's new? This Mei Zhou Zhuang, what's new? Old from Pang Yuanjing, and the other from a dealer. We'll tell the scandal later. And Pang Yuanjing published this article particularly for Freer. I was in Freer. I saw the catalog. This catalog was actually the photo just for Freer. It's just amazing. And then this tool is very special. Modern Chinese art. Gu and Jing. Ancient and modern. So that's new. So that's very interesting part. And we can see what's Gu. Here is the deal. August 29th, 1915. These two people met in the Fairmont Hotel. I don't know whether this hotel is still there. And the deal was $16,500 for 13 paintings from Pang Yuanjing. And then he helped his friend, Mayer, to purchase two paintings at a price of $10,000, including this one. So this price is in 1915. And don't forget this person, Li Wanqing. This is a very, very tricky person. I will mention this scandal just in a second. So modern part. What's modern? You can see the actress Dodgen. Her there's about flower painting, and then very famous landscapers painting. But the main purpose of this catalog was to promote the copy of ancient paintings, and with the collector's name. So it's like a roadmap. You purchase my catalog, you can find the collector of those ancient paintings. So the collector of those ancient paintings. But the modern part actually was just the second one. The major one actually was here. So the Florence Ashcroft was the person who helped Stronach to do the English translation. And she was the person who married a businessman who hired a comprador. The comprador collected a lot of modern paintings, Shanghai school paintings. So Florence helped to compile this catalog for the 1915 show. So on Christmas Day, 1914, that comprador, his name is Liu Songfu, on board a boat to San Francisco. So that was an amazing year-long experience in San Francisco, ups and downs. And then you can see testing the unknown waters. And he was about to transform his business from the Benzhuang to the Yangzhuang. Benzhuang was for the domestic, and he was wealthy enough to purchase the contemporary artist works. Yangzhuang was foreigner, mostly like ancient. But when he stayed in San Francisco, you can see the painting. You know, Ren Bonian. Ren Bonian dedicated the painting to him. So this painting was shown in San Francisco. But who was the buyer? Well, whether Charles Lam Free, I will give you very interesting news reporting about this fascinating person. I think I need to quote this because you would like to hear how he was introduced. In the central building of the exposition group is displayed some of the rarest art existing in China today. The painting on silk are a portion of the collection of Liu Song, a wealthy Chinese lover of art, whose treasures are said to include the best and the greatest number of Chinese painting extant. The greater portion of his collection is exhibited in the Palace of the Fine Arts. Some of those shown in the Chinese pavilion are more than 1,000 years old. You see, the mindset is still 1,000 years old. So, here, the scandal. Two scandals all occurred on this very unfortunate old man. He was about 70 years old. First, he was tricked by his Shanghai partner, Li Wenqi. And I read a very interesting detail. The detail was a San Francisco detective, his name is Harry Eckhoff, contacted Charles Lam Freer and informed Freer that the paintings did not belong to Li Wenqi or Li Wenqi, but rather to Liu Songfu, which means this dealer took Liu Songfu's antique paintings as his own and sold it to Freer, because Li Wenqi speaks English better than Liu Songfu. Freer had already sent 28 paintings to Cleveland Museum of Fine Art. Freer never revealed where the 28 paintings had gone, but agreed to return the 59 paintings still in his possession, only if Li Wenqing returned the full amount paid for all 87 works at $5,280. Freer held firm, and when he was repaid, he sent the 59 paintings to Ecuador. So the first scandal was in San Francisco, detected by a local expert. That's the first one. The second was even more miserable because Liu Songfu was in disaster. So he embezzled a large amount of money of Florence Ashcroft's husband's company. So that was a disaster. He was a very loyal kind of confidant, but at that kind of difficult moment, he did very bad thing. And he couldn't, pay off the thing. So the only way to pay back is to use his collection. And the company couldn't use the painting to produce the profit. So the next thing is the very interesting trip made on the trip rushed to New York by Ashcroft's wife, Florence. And the first person he targeted was Freer. So you can see amazing correspondence, December 12th, 1917. And when Freer received that without delay, the second day, immediate reply. How he replied? He replied in a very discouraging way. Very discouraging way. He said, this is very sad. As you know, I'm deeply interested in helping to make known in America the best Oriental ancient art. I'm equally opposed to inferior specimens finding anchorage in the United States. I have already helped to send back to China much trash that was offered or about to be offered to American buyers. And on the other hand, have added to considerable extent every effort that has come to my attention to place in American public and private collections such objects of ancient Chinese art as I believe to be valuable as objects of real aesthetic value, unquote. But Florence or Ashcroft, she argued, said that modern painting has its own value. But Freer insisted, said, do not send me any new or later pictures. I buy only some or earlier paintings with his permission. So you can see the very interesting difference. However, Liu Songfu does possess some very high quality modern paintings. And the long story, I published an article by the Florida University Press, will come out this year, and will unveil the detail. And most of the high quality paintings are now in the collection of the Chicago Art Museum. The Museum of Art Institute of Chicago. So you can see it's a very high quality works. So now we see another transformation, the third transformation of Chinese market, the global market interest from yesterday's Chinese painting to today's. So that's a very important contribution, though in the beginning it was very difficult. So we can make it kind of a short review. We can see where are we now, just focusing on the foreign market, from the object to painting, mostly ancient painting, and then covering different type of ancient painting. some excluded in Chinese collectors' taste. And then from ancient painting to the contemporary, at that time, modern painting. And finally, to have a very important kind of impact to promote the modernist art. And this is my selling point. And we have covered the major market in the map, on the map. And we still miss one. We'll cover that just a second. Here is a real mystery. And I'm still looking for that answer. In 1926, Huang Binhong published a journal. The journal has an article translated by a person called Wang Shufan. And with, I cannot show this here, a preface to an antique painting exhibition in New York. And I have been searching for this preface for decades and asked many experts and checked different kinds of data. I haven't found that yet. But I have Chinese translation. The editorial notes are very clear. Said when Bruce traveled in China, he was a Wall Street banker. And he was defeated by his rival, J.P. Morgan. So he quit in 1923 and became a painter. And he started painting in Italy. And in 1929, he held his successful exhibition in Paris and other cities at the time when Wall Street crashed. So Wall Street said, we have a prophet who quitted the business in the time when Wall Street was on the rise. And now he is the rising star in art world, and our market is crashed. So you can see he is kind of amazing person. And when he did that connection in China, he consulted Huang Binhong. 常与黄宾虹商榷会师. So he was, kind of a business partner with Huang Binhong. And you can see that collection in the Ford Museum, now the Sutherland Museum at the Harvard University. I saw it. 80 pieces. Very interesting works. So, but who is Edward Bruce? If we read the new LA Times in 1935, we find an amazing recognition. Bruce will doubtlessly become an important figure in American art history. But the question is why? Do you ever heard this name, in the history book? Not really, right? So what happened? Why in his lifetime he was so famous? There was a book called New Deal. He was in charge of a federal project appointed by FDR. Very famous person. And he also was positionist, an American artist. And his style, you can see, he painted a lot of views of California. This is in Rome. And then at Harvard, I don't have a high quality image, mountain type. And definitely he had a lot of connection with Chinese painting. And many reviewers, there was quite a few reviews mentioned his relationship with Chinese painting. He was forgotten. So the question is, why that collecting Chinese painting, has something to do with the Western painting, with the avant-garde or modern art, global-wise. And I have another better case, which I published an article in the Journal of the National Central University a few years ago, about this Italian painter. So I make the number. The number is the Anglo-French market. He was Italian, but he married a French lady and lived in Paris and Nice for a long time. And he collected Chinese painting and Japanese painting, and very resourceful to a group of leading avant-gardes, Picasso, many, you name it. And also with the Chinese painters. In 1982 to 1935, he was a big name in China. Cai Yuanpei wrote a preface by hand for his exhibition. And Huang Binhong mentioned his name in 1947 in a Cantonese newspaper with the publication of the you see, that's the one that we see. Overseas collecting has a way to promote modernism. You know, that's very important. Regardless it's collecting ancient Chinese painting or contemporary Chinese painting. And you can see Huang Binhong himself, had a business partner in Shanghai, and then give the painting to his German collector. So I use number 1, actually is not accurate. It's called Anglo-Saxon. You know, it's not Anglo-French. It's an Anglo-Saxon market. So it's an extension of that market. And you can see this painting I saw original. This I took from original in Cologne Art Museum, Cologne Museum. And you can see this is 1917, right before the World War I, because the doctor was expelled by Chinese government with enemies. And then later on, many shows, particularly in 1935, Liu Haishu hosted the exhibition. And several paintings were purchased by the German government. One of them was made by Huang. So you can see the way that Chinese painting promoted the modernism was very important. Now, you are familiar and revered scholar, Michael Sullivan. And I had a privilege to know him since 1984. And I revisited him in 2008 after 20 years interval. My first visit to him in Oxford was 1987. So I know him very well. I translated his book, Symbols of Eternity, and I did a lot of things about his research on the modern painters. One discovery that shocked him, in 2003, when Huang, his wife, passed away, he faxed me, said, I will spend time in the United States. I want to spend time with my former student from Stanford, who owned the very famous firm in Gig Harbor, very close to where I stay. So I spent one day with him talking about everything. And I showed some material. He was completely surprised. He didn't know that he was so famous to some leading Chinese artists in the 1940s. Most famous to Huang Binhong, because Huang Binhong gave him a painting, just volunteer, send it to him. So I said, do you know Huang Binhong? He said, no. I said, but Huang Binhong know you very well. I said, why? I showed him Huang Binhong's letter, more than 10 letters, with Huang Binhong's handwriting, Su Li Wen. So we said, your name in Huang Binhong's hand, you know. So wow, what happened? Why? So in 2005, I published an article called Unspoken Dialogue. The kind of a fascinating intellectual communication between these two. And then the point that I'm making about the global market. We finally will nail down the Nanyang market, Singapore. In 1947, Huang Binhong was planning to visit Singapore because his overseas Chinese students wanted him to visit them, host exhibition or something. But for various reasons, that trip was never made. So Huang Binhong never take a step outside his motherland. And then, that time, Sullivan was in London. He later on got a PhD at Harvard. In 1954, he got an invitation from National Malaya University as the curator of the art museum. And his friend on the East Coast said, never go there. That's the desert of culture. Never go there. He said, well, let me try. And he went there, and there was really a strike of fortune. He studied Chinese ceramic there, and he encountered numerous modern Chinese paintings. So many people, they stopped there, or they exhibited there. And Huang Binhong has so many die-hard fans. And Huang Binhong gives the best paintings to them. Of course, sold them, people pay, right? And one of them is Chen Jingzao, his faithful disciple, who collected more than 100 pieces of Huang Binhong, called Bai Huang Zai, or Bai Hong Lou, 100 Huang Binhong, pavilion of 100 Huang Binhong. One of them is this. And then in 1959, Huang Binhong, Sullivan published a catalog of Chinese painting in Malaya, in Singapore. And then the same year he published a book by University of California Press at Berkeley. So you can see everything connected. And the front piece of this first book of its kind in English language put Huang Binhong as a modernist. And because thanks to Huang Binhong's contribution to the global market, to the overseas collecting, and ironically, in 1993, Michael Sullivan revised this book in a much, much thicker book called Art and Artist of the 20th Century. And about the Huang Binhong painting, I told him, you made a forgery as a major piece of art. He said, oh, that's in Metropolitan Museum, it shouldn't be okay. But actually, Ellsworth provided junk, Huang Binhong ones, for the Metropolitan Museum. And Sullivan didn't see the original as he did in Singapore. So the last market that I try to give you an idea of the global setting is really amazing. So I want to read the concluding part. I think this is the one that gives us an inspiration why the Chinese, the transformation of Chinese art is so inseparable from the overseas collecting. So I said, now we at least know the role of South Asian market in Singapore, and we see the transformation of Chinese painting from traditionalism to modernism. And I return to the invitation of Director Hui's, initiation of Director Hui's invitation, with a focus on contemporary Chinese art collecting. So far, I have told you certain aspects of the transformative process of Chinese painting through overseas collecting from historical view of point. But you will wonder, what about contemporary? How close is my talk to the expectation of my audience here spending this afternoon with me at the center? So I quote very famous art historian, perhaps one of the greatest art historian of all time, Alvin Panofsky. He helped us to make that point. He said, why do we, or are we interested in history? Because this is a question people always ask. And his answer is so provocative. So, because we are interested in reality. So, in sum, I said that the story of transformation of Chinese painting through overseas collecting provides us a cross-contextual perspective from which we can approach an even more fascinating situation. It's contemporary collecting, right? After China became the world's second wealthiest country in 2010. You can see much complicated situation. Who are transforming Chinese thinking through the global market? I want to give you one more background information. Look at this. Economic freedom scores 2013. According to this score, I should show the whole color picture. The most kind of a free zone is, America. China was much backward. But the market for Chinese art is a very different picture. Very different picture. So I hope that through this kind of historical perspective, we see why in the time when Westernization became overwhelmed, the Chinese traditional art and contemporary art still found a way to win the collector's attention because the cross-contextual paradigm. I made a reference to Luo Zhenli. Now I can conclude with that. Luo Zhenli was a terrible political figure. His reputation is notorious because he dedicated to the overthrown the Qing dynasty as a loyalist, right? And then he helped the last emperor to become the puppet emperor in Manchuria. So he was just notorious in all accounts. However, the last emperor disliked him, called him a very wicked and dictator. So you will see that kind of person is so bad, right? Just bad, according to the Chinese concept, just bad. Even the reformed last emperor considered him terrible. However, he was the leading scholar of Chinese modern scholarship. If you count the early 20th century Chinese scholarship, 5 major discoveries, all related to Luo Zhenli. So how could that be? How could that be? Because Luo Zhenli spent 9 years in Kyoto, not dedicated to politics, but to scholarship. In that context, he was the leading scholar of sinology. That was just the sun-rising enterprise. And his knowledge, his talent, his dedication is just the right person for the right time, right place. So in that cross-contextual paradigm, his paradox is so easy to solve. But I didn't solve that problem until 2008. I presented my paper in London, and I just found this is just contradictory. Everything that this person did is contradictory. After I put it in the cross-contextual paradox, everything is reasonable. So to understand this transformation, we just see because of the overseas collecting, that market preserved the interest, preserved the energy, preserved the passion for the traditional and contemporary Chinese art. That made China ready to move to the new century. So that's the one that I try to share with you. Thank you. And you can see this is a blurred view by Mr. James Liu about this beautiful city.